This week's Grimm Fairy Tales. The Pink. There was once on a time a queen to whom God had given no children. Every morning she went into the garden and prayed to God in heaven to bestow on her a son or a daughter. Then an angel from heaven came to her and said, "Be at rest. Thou shalt have a son with the power of wishing, so that whatsoever in the world he wishes for, that shall he have." Then she went to the king and told him the joyful tidings, and when the time was come, she gave birth to a son, and the king was filled with gladness. Every morning she went with the child to the garden where the wild beasts were kept, and washed herself there in a clear stream. It happened once when the child was a little older, that it was lying in her arms and she fell asleep. Then came the old cook, who knew that the child had the power of wishing, and stole it away. And he took a hen and cut it in pieces, and dropped some of its blood on the queen's apron and on her dress. Then he carried the child away to a secret place, where a nurse was obliged to suckle it, and he ran to the king and accused the queen of having allowed her child to be taken from her by the wild beasts. When the king saw the blood on her apron, he believed this, fell into such a passion that he ordered a high tower to be built, in which neither sun nor moon could be seen, and had his wife put into it and walled up. Here she was to stay for 7 years without meat or drink and die of hunger. But God sent 2 angels from heaven in the shape of white doves, which flew to her twice a day and carried her food until the 7 years were over. The cook, however, thought to himself, "If the child has the power of wishing, and I am here, he might very easily get me into trouble." So he left the palace and went to the boy, who was already big enough to speak, and said to him, "Wish for a beautiful palace for thyself with a garden, and all else that pertains to it." Scarcely were the words out of the boy's mouth when everything was there that he had wished for. After a while, the cook said to him, "It is not well for thee to be so alone. Wish for a pretty girl as a companion." The king's son wished for one, and she immediately stood before him, and was more beautiful than any painter could have painted her. The two played together and loved each other with all their hearts, and the old cook went out hunting like a noble man. The thought, however, occurred to him that the king's son might someday wish to be with his father, and thus bring him into great peril. So he went out and took the maiden aside and said, "Tonight, when the boy is asleep, go to his bed and plunge this knife into his heart, and bring me his heart and tongue, and if thou dost not do it, thou shalt lose thy life." Thereupon he went away, and when he returned next day, she had not done it, and said, "Why should I shed the blood of an innocent boy who has never harmed anyone?" The cook once more said, "If thou dost not do it, it shall cost thee thy own life." When he had gone away, she had a little hind brought to her, and ordered her to be killed, and took her heart and tongue, and laid them on a plate. And when she saw the old man coming, she said to the boy, "Lie down in thy bed, and draw the clothes over thee." Then the wicked wretch came in and said, "Where are the boy's heart and tongue?" The girl reached the plate to him, but the king's son threw off the quilt and said, "Thou old sinner, why didst thou want to kill me? Now will I pronounce thy sentence. Thou shalt become a black poodle and have a gold collar round thy neck, and shalt eat burning coals till the flames burst forth from thy throat." And when he had spoken these words, the old man was changed into a poodle dog, and had a gold collar round his neck, and the cooks were ordered to bring up some live coals, and these he ate until the flames broke forth from his throat. The king's son remained there a short while longer, and he thought of his mother, and wondered if she were still alive. At length he said to the maiden, "I will go to my own country. If thou wilt go with me, I will provide for thee." "Ah," she replied, "the way is so long, and what shall I do in a strange land where I am unknown?" As she did not seem quite willing, and as they could not be parted from each other, he wished that she might be changed into a beautiful pink, and took her with him. Then he went away to his own country, and the poodle had to run after him. He went to the tower in which his mother was confined, and as it was so high, he wished for a ladder which would reach up to the very top. Then he mounted up and looked inside and cried, "Beloved Mother Lady Queen, are you still alive, or are you dead?" She answered, "I have just eaten and am still satisfied," for she thought the angels were there. Said he, "I am your dear son, whom the wild beasts were said to have torn from your arms, but I am alive still, and will speedily deliver you." Then he descended again, and went to his father and caused himself to be announced as a strange huntsman, and asked if he could give him a place. The king said yes, if he was skillful and could get game for him, he should come to him, but that deer had never taken up their quarters in any part of the district or country. Then the huntsman promised to procure as much game for him as he could possibly use at the royal table. So he summoned all the huntsmen together, and bade them go out into the forest with him, and he went with them and made them form a great circle, open at one end where he stationed himself, and began to wish. 200 deer and more came running inside the circle at once, and the huntsman shot them. Then they were all placed on 60 country carts and driven home to the king, and for once he was able to deck his table with game, after having had none at all for years. Now the king felt great joy at this, and commanded that his entire household should eat with him next day, and made a great feast. When they were all assembled together, he said to the huntsman, "As thou art so clever, thou shalt sit by me." He replied, "Lord King, your majesty must excuse me. I am a poor huntsman." But the king insisted on it and said, "Thou shalt sit by me," until he did it. Whilst he was sitting there, he thought of his dearest mother, and wished that one of the king's principal servants would begin to speak of her, and would ask how it was faring with the queen in the tower, and if she were alive still or had perished. Hardly had he formed the wish, than the marshal began and said, "Your Majesty, we live joyously here, but how is the queen living in the tower? Is she still alive, or has she died?" But the king replied, "She let my dear son be torn to pieces by wild beasts. I will not have her named." Then the huntsman arose and said, "Gracious Lord Father, she is alive still, and I am her son. And I was not carried away by wild beasts, but by that wretch the old cook, who tore me from her arms when she was asleep, and sprinkled her apron with the blood of a chicken." Thereupon he took the dog with the golden collar and said, "That is the wretch," and caused live coals to be brought, and these the dog was compelled to devour before the sight of all, until flames burst forth from its throat. On this the huntsman asked the king if he would like to see the dog in his true shape, and he wished him back into the form of the cook, in the which he stood immediately, with his white apron and his knife by his side. When the king saw him, he fell into a passion, and ordered him to be cast into the deepest dungeon. Then the huntsman spake further and said, "Father, will you see the maiden who brought me up so tenderly, and who was afterwards to murder me? but did not do it, though her own life depended on it. The king replied, "Yes, I would like to see her." The son said, "Most gracious father, I will show her to you in the form of a beautiful flower." And he thrust his hand into his pocket and brought forth the pink and placed it on the royal table. And it was so beautiful that the king had never seen one to equal it. Then the son said, "Now will I show her to you in her own form, and wish that she might become a maiden." And she stood there looking so beautiful that no painter could have made her look more so. And the king sent 2 waiting maids and 2 attendants into the tower to fetch the queen and bring her to the royal table. But when she was led in, she ate nothing and said, "The gracious and merciful God who has supported me in the tower will speedily deliver me." She lived 3 days more and then died happily. And when she was buried, the 2 white doves which had brought her food to the tower and were angels of heaven followed her body and seated themselves on her grave. The aged king ordered the cook to be torn in 4 pieces, but grief consumed the king's own heart, and he soon died. His son married the beautiful maiden, whom he had brought with him as a flower in his pocket, and whether they are still alive or not is known to God. Mother Holle. There was once a widow who had 2 daughters, one of whom was pretty and industrious, whilst the other was ugly and idle. But she was much fonder of the ugly and idle one, because she was her own daughter, and the other, who was a stepdaughter, was obliged to do all the work and be the Cinderella of the house. Every day the poor girl had to sit by a well in the highway and spin till her fingers bled. Now it happened that one day the shuttle was marked with her blood, so she dipped it in the well to wash the mark off, but it dropped out of her hand and fell to the bottom. She began to weep and ran to her stepmother and told her of the mishap, but she scolded her sharply and was so merciless as to say, "Since you have let the shuttle fall in, you must fetch it out again." So the girl went back to the well and did not know what to do, and in the sorrow of her heart she jumped into the well to get the shuttle. She lost her senses, and when she awoke and came to herself again, she was in a lovely meadow where the sun was shining and many thousands of flowers were growing. Along this meadow she went, and at last came to a baker's oven full of bread, and the bread cried out, "Ho, take me out, or I shall burn. I have been baked a long time." So she went up to it and took out all the loaves one after another with the bread shovel. After that, she went on till she came to a tree covered with apples, which called out to her, "Oh, shake me, we apples are all ripe." So she shook the tree till the apples fell like rain, and went on shaking till they were all down, and when she had gathered them into a heap, she went on her way. At last she came to a little house, out of which an old woman peeped, but she had such large teeth that the girl was frightened, and was about to run away. But the old woman called out to her, "What are you afraid of, dear child? Stay with me. If you will do all the work in the house properly, you shall be the better for it. Only you must take care to make my bed well, and shake it thoroughly till the feathers fly, for then there is snow on the earth. I am Mother Holle." As the old woman spoke so kindly to her, the girl took courage and agreed to enter her service. She attended to everything to the satisfaction of her mistress, and always shook her bed so vigorously that the feathers flew about like snowflakes. So she had a pleasant life with her, never an angry word, and boiled or roast meat every day. She stayed some time with Mother Holle, and then she became sad. At first she did not know what was the matter with her, but found at length that it was homesickness. Although she was many thousand times better off here than at home, still she had a longing to be there. At last she said to the old woman, "I have a longing for home, and however well off I am down here, I cannot stay any longer. I must go up again to my own people." Mother Holle said,
"I am pleased that you long for your home again, and as you have served me so truly, I myself will take you up again."
Thereupon she took her by the hand and led her to a large door. The door was opened, and just as the maiden was standing beneath the doorway, a heavy shower of golden rain fell, and all the gold remained sticking to her, so that she was completely covered with it.
"You shall have that because you have been so industrious,"
said Mother Holle, and at the same time she gave her back the shuttle which she had let fall into the well. Thereupon the door closed, and the maiden found herself up above the earth, not far from her mother's house. And as she went into the yard, the cock was standing by the well side and cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your golden girl's come back to you." So she went in to her mother, and as she arrived, thus covered with gold, she was well received both by her and her sister. The girl told all that had happened to her, and as soon as the mother heard how she had come by so much wealth, she was very anxious to obtain the same good luck for the ugly and lazy daughter. She had to seat herself by the well and spin, and in order that her shuttle might be stained with blood, she stuck her hand into a thorn bush and pricked her finger. Then she threw her shuttle into the well and jumped in after it. She came, like the other, to the beautiful meadow and walked along the very same path. When she got to the oven, the bread again cried,
"Oh, take me out, or I shall burn. I have been baked a long time."
But the lazy thing answered, "As if I had any wish to make myself dirty." And on she went. Soon she came to the apple tree, which cried,
"Oh, shake me, we apples are all ripe."
But she answered, "I like that. One of you might fall on my head." And so went on. When she came to Mother Holle's house, she was not afraid, for she had already heard of her big teeth, and she hired herself to her immediately. The first day she forced herself to work diligently and obeyed Mother Holle when she told her to do anything, for she was thinking of all the gold that she would give her. But on the second day, she began to be lazy, and on the third day, still more so. And then she would not get up in the morning at all. Neither did she make Mother Holle's bed as she ought, and did not shake it so as to make the feathers fly up. Mother Holle was soon tired of this, and gave her notice to leave. The lazy girl was willing enough to go, and thought that now the golden rain would come. Mother Holle led her also to the great door, but while she was standing beneath it, instead of the gold, a big kettleful of pitch was emptied over her.
"That is the reward for your service,"
said Mother Holle, and shut the door. So the lazy girl went home, but she was quite covered with pitch, and the cock by the well said, as soon as he saw her, cried out, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! Your pitchy girl's come back to you." But the pitch stuck fast to her, and could not be got off as long as she lived. The True Sweetheart. There was once on a time a girl who was young and beautiful, but she had lost her mother when she was quite a child, and her stepmother did all she could to make the girl's life wretched. Whenever this woman gave her anything to do, she worked at it indefatigably and did everything that lay in her power. Still, she could not touch the heart of the wicked woman by that. She was never satisfied. It was never enough. The heart of the girl worked. The more work was put upon her, and all that the woman thought of was how to weigh her down with still heavier burdens and make her life still more miserable. One day she said to her, "Here are 12 pounds of feathers which thou must pick, and if they are not done this evening, thou mayst expect a good beating. Dost thou imagine thou art to idle away the whole day?" The poor girl sat down to the work, but tears ran down her cheeks as she did so, for she saw plainly enough that it was quite impossible to finish the work in one day. Whenever she had a little heap of feathers lying before her, and she sighed or smote her hands together in her anguish, they flew away, and she had to pick them out again and begin her work anew. Then she put her elbows on the table, laid her face into her hands, and cried, "Is there no one, then, on God's earth to have pity on me?" Then she heard a low voice which said, "Be comforted, my child. I have come to help thee." The maiden looked up, and an old woman was by her side. She took the girl kindly by the hand and said, "Only tell me what is troubling thee." As she spoke so kindly, the girl told her of her miserable life, and how one burden after another was laid upon her, and she could never get to the end of the work which was given to her. "If I had not done these feathers by this evening, my stepmother will beat me. She has threatened she will, and I know she keeps her word." Her tears began to flow again, but the good old woman said, "Do not be afraid, my child. Rest a while, and in the meantime I will look to thy work." The girl lay down on her bed and soon fell asleep. The old woman seated herself at the table with the feathers, and how they did fly off the quills, which she scarcely touched with her withered hands. The 12 pounds were soon finished, and when the girl awoke, great snow-white heaps were lying piled up, and everything in the room was neatly cleared away. But the old woman had vanished. The maiden thanked God and sat still till evening came, when the stepmother came in and marveled to see the work completed. "Just look, you awkward creature," said she. "What can be done when people are industrious? And why couldst thou not set about something else? There thou sittest with thy hands crossed." When she went out, she said, "The creature is worth more than her salt. I must give her some work that is still harder." Next morning she called the girl and said, "There is a spoon for thee. With that thou must empty out for me the great pond which is beside the garden, and if it is not done by night, thou knowest what will happen." The girl took the spoon and saw that it was full of holes, but even if it had not been, she never could have emptied the pond with it. She set to work at once, knelt down by the water, into which her tears were falling, and began to empty it. But the good old woman appeared again, and when she learnt the cause of her grief, she said, "Be of good cheer, my child. Go into the thicket and lie down and sleep. I will soon do thy work." As soon as the old woman was alone, she barely touched the pond, and a vapor rose up on high from the water, and mingled itself with the clouds. Gradually, the pond was emptied, and when the maiden awoke before sunset and came thither, she saw nothing but the fishes which were struggling in the mud. She went to her stepmother and showed her that the work was done. "It ought to have been done long before this," said she, and grew white with anger, but she meditated something anew. On the third morning she said to the girl, "Thou must build me a castle on the plain there, and it must be ready by the evening." The maiden was dismayed and said, "How can I complete such a great work?" "I will endure no opposition," screamed the stepmother. "If thou canst empty a pond with a spoon that is full of holes, thou canst build a castle too. I will take possession of it this very day, and if anything is wanting, even if it be the most trifling thing in the kitchen or cellar, thou knowest what lies before thee." She drove the girl out, and when she entered the valley, the rocks were there, piled up one above the other, and all her strength would not have enabled her to even move the very smallest of them. She sat down and wept, and still she hoped the old woman would help her. The old woman was not long in coming. She comforted her and said, "Lie down there in the shade and sleep. I will soon build the castle for thee. If it would be a pleasure to thee, thou canst live in it thyself." When the maiden had gone away, the old woman touched the gray rocks. They began to rise and immediately moved together as if giants had built the walls. And on these the building arose, and it seemed as if countless hands were working invisibly and placing one stone upon another. There was a dull, heavy noise from the ground. Pillars arose of their own accord on high and placed themselves in order near each other. The tiles laid themselves in order on the roof, and when noonday came, the great weathercock was already turning itself on the summit of the tower, like a golden figure of the Virgin with fluttering garments. The inside of the castle was being finished while evening was drawing near. How the old woman managed it, I know not, but the walls of the rooms were hung with silk and velvet. Embroidered chairs were there, and richly ornamented armchairs by marble tables. Crystal chandeliers hung down from the ceilings and mirrored themselves in the smooth pavement. Green parrots were there in gilt cages, and so were strange birds which sang most beautifully. And there was on all sides as much magnificence as if a king were going to live there. The sun was just setting when the girl awoke, and the brightness of 1,000 lights flashed in her face. She hurried to the castle and entered by the open door. The steps were spread with red cloth, and the golden balustrades beset with flowering trees. When she saw the splendor of the apartment, she stood as if turned to stone. Who knew how long she might have stood there if she had not remembered the stepmother? "Alas," she said to herself, "if she could but be satisfied at last, and would give up making my life a misery to me." The girl went and told her that the castle was ready. "I will move into it at once," said she, and rose from her seat. When they entered the castle, she was forced to hold her hand before her eyes. The brilliancy of everything was so dazzling. "Thou seest," said she to the girl, "how easy it has been for thee to do this. I ought to have given thee something harder." She went through all the rooms and examined every corner to see if anything was wanting or defective, but she could discover nothing. "Now we will go down below," said she, looking at the girl with malicious eyes. "The kitchen and the cellar still have to be examined, and if thou hast forgotten anything, thou shalt not escape thy punishment." But the fire was burning on the hearth, and the meat was cooking in the pans. The tongs and shovels were leaning against the wall, and the shining brazen utensils all arranged in sight. Nothing was wanting, not even a coal box and water pail. "Which is the way to the cellar?" she cried. "If that is not abundantly filled, it shall go ill with thee." She herself raised up the trap door and descended, but she had hardly made 2 steps before the heavy trap door, which was only laid back, fell down. The girl heard a scream, lifted up the door very quickly to go to her aid, but she had fallen down, and the girl found her lying lifeless at the bottom. And now the magnificent castle belonged to the girl alone. She at first did not know how to reconcile herself to her good fortune. Beautiful dresses were hanging in the wardrobes. The chests were filled with gold or silver, or with pearls and jewels, and she never felt a desire that she was not able to gratify. And soon the fame of the beauty and riches of the maiden went over all the world. Wooers presented themselves daily, but none pleased her. At length the son of the king came, and he knew how to touch her heart, and she betrothed herself to him. In the garden of the castle was a lime tree, under which they were one day sitting together, when he said to her, "I will go home and obtain my father's consent to our marriage. I entreat thee to wait for me here under this lime tree. I shall be back with thee in a few hours." The maiden kissed him on his left cheek and said, "Keep true to me, and never let anyone else kiss thee on this cheek. I will wait here under the lime tree until thou returnest." The maid stayed beneath the lime tree until sunset, but he did not return. She sat 3 days from morning till evening, waiting for him, but in vain. As he still was not there by the 4th day, she said, "Some accident has assuredly befallen him. I will go out and seek him, and will not come back until I have found him." She packed up 3 of her most beautiful dresses, one embroidered with bright stars, the second with silver moons, the third with golden suns, tied up a handful of jewels in her handkerchief, and set out. She inquired everywhere for her betrothed, but no one had seen him. No one knew anything about him. Far and wide did she wander through the world, but she found him not. At last she hired herself to a farmer as a cowherd, and buried her dresses and jewels beneath a stone. And now she lived as a herdswoman, guarded her herd, and was very sad and full of longing before her beloved one. She had a little calf, which she taught to know her, and fed it out of her own hand. And when she said, little calf, kneel by my side, and do not forget thy shepherd maid, as the prince forgot his betrothed bride, who waited for him 'neath the lime tree's shade." The little calf knelt down, and she stroked it. And when she had lived for a couple of years alone and full of grief, a report was spread over all the land that the king's daughter was about to celebrate her marriage. The road to the town passed through the village where the maiden was living, and it came to pass that once when the maiden was driving out her herd, her bridegroom traveled by. He was sitting proudly on his horse, and never looked round, but when she saw him, she recognized her beloved, and it was just as if a sharp knife had pierced her heart. "Alas," said she, "I believed him true to me, but he has forgotten me." Next day he again came along the road. When he was near her, she said to the little calf, little calf, kneel by my side, and do not forget thy shepherd maid, as the prince forgot his betrothed bride, who waited for him 'neath the lime tree's shade." When he was aware of the voice, he looked down and reined in his horse. He looked into the herd's face, and then put his hands before his eyes as if he were trying to remember something. But he soon rode onwards and was out of sight. "Alas," said she, "he no longer knows me." And her grief was even greater. Soon after this, a great festival 3 days long was to be held at the king's court, and the whole country was invited to it. "Now will I try my last chance," thought the maiden. And when evening came, she went to the stone under which she had buried her treasures. She took out the dress with the golden suns, put it on, and adorned herself with the jewels. She let down her hair, which she had concealed under a handkerchief, and it fell down in long curls about her. And thus she went into the town, and in the darkness was observed by no one. When she entered the brightly lighted hall, everyone started back in amazement. But no one knew who she was. The king's son went to meet her, but he did not recognize her. He led her out to dance, and was so enchanted with her beauty that he thought no more of the other bride. When the feast was over, she vanished in the crowd and hastened before daybreak to the village, where she once more put on her herd's dress. Next evening she took out the dress with the silver moons and put a half-moon made of precious stones in her hair. When she appeared at the festival, all eyes were turned upon her, but the king's son hastened to meet her, and filled with love for her, danced with her alone, and no longer so much as glanced at anyone else. Before she went away, she was forced to promise him to come again to the festival on the last evening. When she appeared for the third time, she wore the star dress which sparkled at every step she took, and her hair ribbon and girdle were starred with jewels. The prince had already been waiting for her for a long time, and forced his way up to her. "Do but tell who thou art," said he. "I feel just as if I had already known thee a long time. Dost thou not know what I did when thou leftest me?" Then she stepped up to him and kissed him on his left cheek, and in a moment it was as if scales fell from his eyes, and he recognized the true bride. "Come," said he to her, "here I stay no longer," gave her his hand and led her down to the carriage. The horses hurried away to the magic castle as if the wind had been harnessed to the carriage. The illuminated windows already shone in the distance. When they drove past the lime tree, countless glowworms were swarming about it. It shook its branches and sent forth their fragrance. On the steps, flowers were blooming, and the room echoed with the song of strange birds. But in the hall, the entire court was assembled, and the priest was waiting to marry the bridegroom to the true bride. The Three Little Birds. About 1,000 or more years ago, there were in this country nothing but small kings, and one of them who lived on the Kutterberg was very fond of hunting. Once on a time, when he was riding forth from his castle with his huntsmen, 3 girls were watching their cows upon the mountain, and then they saw the king with all his followers. The eldest girl pointed to him and called to the 2 other girls, "If I do not get that one, I will have none." Then the second girl answered from the other side of the hill and pointed to the one who was on the king's right hand. "Hiloa, Hiloa, if I do not get him, I will have no one." These, however, were the 2 ministers. The king heard all this, and when he had come back from the chase, he caused the 3 girls to be brought to him, and asked them what they had said yesterday on the mountain. This they would not tell him, so the king asked the eldest if she really would take him for her husband. Then she said, "Yes," and the 2 ministers married the 2 sisters, for they were all 3 fair and beautiful of face, especially the queen, who had hair like flax. But the 2 sisters had no children, and once when the king was obliged to go from home, he invited them to come to the queen in order to cheer her, for she was about to bear a child. She had a little boy who brought a bright red star into the world with him. Then the 2 sisters said to each other that they would throw the beautiful boy into the water. When they had thrown him in, I believe it was into the Weser, a little bird flew up into the air, which sang, "To thy death art thou sped, until God's word be said. In the white lily bloom, brave boy, is thy tomb." When the 2 heard that, they were frightened to death, and ran away in great haste. When the king came home, they told him that the queen had been delivered of a dog. Then the king said, What God does is well done. But a fisherman who dwelt near the water fished the little boy out again while he was still alive, and as his wife had no children, they reared him. When a year had gone by, the king again went away, and the queen had another little boy, whom the false sisters likewise took and threw into the water. Then up flew a little bird again and sang, "To thy death art thou sped, until God's word be said. In the white lily bloom, brave boy, is thy tomb." And when the king came back, they told him that the queen had once more given birth to a dog, and he again said, "What God does is well done." The fisherman, however, fished this one also out of the water and reared him. Then the king again journeyed forth, and the queen had a little girl, whom also the false sisters threw into the water. Then again a little bird flew up high and sang, "To thy death art thou sped, until God's word be said. In the white lily bloom, brave boy, is thy tomb." And when the king came home, they told him that the queen had been delivered of a cat. Then the king grew angry and ordered his wife to be cast into prison, and therein was she shut up for many long years. In the meantime, the children had grown up. The eldest son went out with some other boys to fish, but the other boys would not have him with them, and said, "Go thy way, foundling." Hereupon he was much troubled, and asked the old fisherman if that was true. The fisherman told him that once when he was fishing he had drawn him out of the water. So the boy said he would go forth and seek his father. The fisherman, however, entreated him to stay, but he would not let himself be hindered, and at last the fisherman consented. Then the boy went on his way and walked for many days, and at last he came to a great piece of water by the side of which stood an old woman fishing. "Good day, mother," said the boy. "Many thanks," said she. "Thou wilt fish long enough before thou catches anything, and thou wilt seek long enough before thou findest thy father. How wilt thou get over the water?" said the woman. "God knows." Then the old woman took him up on her back and carried him through it, and he sought for a long time but could not find his father. When a year had gone by, the second boy set out to seek his brother. He came to the water, and all fared with him just as with his brother. And now there was no one at home but the daughter, and she mourned for her brother so much that at last she also begged the fisherman to let her set forth, for she wished to go in search of her brothers. Then she likewise came to the great piece of water, and she said to the old woman, "Good day, mother." "Many thanks," replied the old woman. "May God help you with your fishing," said the maiden. When the old woman heard that, she became quite friendly, and carried her over the water, gave her a wand, and said to her, "Go, my daughter, ever onwards by this road, and when you come to a great black dog, you must pass it silently and boldly, without either laughing or looking at it. Then you will come to a great high castle, on the threshold of which you must let the wand fall, and go straight through the castle, and out again on the other side. There you will see an old fountain out of which a large tree has grown, whereon hangs a bird in a cage, which you must take down. Take likewise a glass of water out of the fountain, and with these two things go back by the same way. Pick up the wand again from the threshold and take it with you, and when you again pass by the dog, strike him in the face with it. But be sure that you hit him, and then just come back here to me." The maiden found everything exactly as the old woman had said, and on her way back, she found her two brothers who had sought each other over half the world. They went together to the place where the black dog was lying on the road. She struck it in the face, and it turned into a handsome prince who went with them to the river. There the old woman was still standing. She rejoiced much to see them again, and carried them all over the water, and then she too went away. for now she was freed. The others, however, went to the old fisherman, and all were glad that they had found each other again. But they hung the bird on the wall. But the second son could not settle at home. He took his crossbow and went a hunting. When he was tired, he took his flute and made music. The king was hunting too, and heard that, and went thither. And when he met the youth, he said, "Who has given thee leave to hunt here?" "Oh, no one." "To whom dost thou belong then?" "I am a fisherman's son." "But he has no children." "If thou wilt not believe, come with me." That the king did, and questioned the fisherman, who told everything to him. And the little bird on the wall began to sing, "The mother sits alone, there in the prison small. O king of royal blood, these are thy children all. The sisters twain so false, they wrought the children woe. There, in the waters deep, where the fishermen come and go." Then they were all terrified, and the king took the bird, the fisherman, and the 3 children back with him to the castle, and ordered the prison to be opened and brought his wife out again. She had, however, grown quite ill and weak. Then the daughter gave her some of the water of the fountain to drink, and she became strong and healthy. But the 2 false sisters were burnt, and the daughter married the prince.